What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. I just wanted to hop on and do a video about the sheriff and judge, or the sheriff who shot the judge case. It is a very interesting case. I've listened to probably 1,000 or watched probably 1,000 trials, listened to countless true crime stories, and I don't think I've ever come across one where the judge was killed by the sheriff. So I wanted to talk about this case. Plus there's some new developments, a bombshell, if you will, about this case that I wanted to discuss. And so before I do that, real quick, I just want to introduce myself. I'm going to be switching over to YouTube from I have a podcast called Bleak that I do with my sister, and she hasn't really been able to do many episodes lately because she's had some health struggles. And so I think I'm gonna kind of go over to the YouTube realm. So just a little background about myself very briefly. My first name is Amanda. I live in Minnesota. I have a background in nursing and psychology. I was a RN. I worked as RN for over a decade, and currently I have 4 children, and I do a lot of gig work, so you'll see a lot of episodes where I'm in my car, and not right now, but I just did a video about Sarah Boone, and I'm in my car on that one. So anyway, I think the channel is going to mainly be ongoing cases that are heading through the legal system, just updating on those, and then the podcast, if we continue to do that, it'll be more like older cases. I might throw some older cases onto the channel as well. We'll see. So anyhow, let's get into the case. So this happened on September 19th, 2024. So just 2.5 months ago as of this recording. This happened in Whitesburg, Kentucky, which is a very small town. I feel like on Dateline and 48 Hours and all those shows, they're always like, it was, a super small town and everybody knew everybody, and they make it seem like everyone's always in everybody else's business and stuff. And I feel like they portray it that way if it's like a town less than 50,000 people, when in reality, like, I live in a city of 20,000 people and I don't know everybody. I don't know everyone's business. But this is actually one of those cases where it actually really is a small town. So you're talking 1,600 people, 16 to 1,700 as of their last U.S. census. So basically, the facts of the case are and by the way, this happened in the judge's chambers. And it was interesting to me because this was all caught on surveillance camera. And one of my very first thoughts when I heard about this case was I thought it was odd that there was surveillance cameras in the judge's chamber. I have never heard of that before. Granted, I don't work in a courthouse, obviously, or anything like that. So, correct me if I'm wrong, if that's like a standard thing to have surveillance in there. But you come to find out in this particular case, there was actually a reason for the surveillance cameras, and we'll get into all of that. But I remember even before I knew any of the, nuances of this case, I thought that was strange. So the sheriff, his name is Sean Mickey Stines. I believe Mickey is just a nickname. He's 43 years old. He and the judge walk into the chambers. I believe they walked in there together. The sheriff is in plain clothes, so assuming he's not on duty. And the judge sits down at his desk. Now, one thing I found interesting was, the way they show judges' chambers, like on TV, you'd think it's like this really nice office with, all this furniture and kind of a nice ambiance, and in reality, well, maybe in other cities it is like that, but just goes to kind of the feel of the small town. Like, literally, this judge's chambers was like this small, very almost looked like a doctor's office room, and there was just like a desk with like 2 chairs in front of the desk, and that was really, and then there's like paperwork all over the place and a laptop on the desk. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Definitely not what you think of when you think of a judge's chambers. Another thing I thought was kind of strange, maybe a little funny, was the judge was smoking a cigarette when this was taking place, and maybe just the small town feel to things, but I just find it odd that the judge is smoking in the courthouse. Very like old school, not with the times type situation there, but I would imagine that's not typical of a judge to smoke in their chambers, but hey, maybe I'm wrong about that too. Who knows? I'm sure you guys will let me know. But so anyhow, they enter the court, or the chambers rather, and Sheriff Stines, at first they're kind of it appears they're arguing back and forth. There's no audio. I don't know if there is audio and they're just not releasing it, or if there just wasn't any audio in that surveillance system, but it looks like they're talking initially, and then it's getting a little more heated. Eventually you see the sheriff point his gun at the judge. The judge is Kevin Mullins, and he's 54, by the way, if I didn't mention that yet. So interestingly, the Sheriff Stines, he gets his cell phone and he picks it up and he makes a phone call. And then you see Judge Mullins hand over his phone, and then Sheriff Stines makes another phone call, but he makes the phone call on Judge Mullins' phone. So, and then after that, that's when the shooting starts, and he shoots him 8 times, and he shoots him a number of times, starts to look like he's going to leave the room, and then he comes back because I believe the judge was still moving, so it was like he wanted to make sure he was deceased, I guess. So, of course, people are wondering what's the motive is here. So, interestingly, too, when this happened, the sheriff leaves the room, and he immediately surrenders to authorities when they get there. He doesn't try to flee. He is the sheriff, so I think he knows not to make much of a statement, because obviously anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. That's, I'm sure every sheriff is familiar with that. So, but he does say, please just treat me fairly. That was like the extent of his statement. So, of course, everybody's like, well, what happened here? Like, obviously he didn't just shoot him for no reason. So initially, he had an arraignment and he was indicted, and then he had a preliminary hearing. Now, a preliminary hearing is basically just a hearing where the prosecution puts on evidence in a courtroom, kind of enough as they don't have to put everything they have in a preliminary hearing, but they have to at least put enough so that present enough evidence so that the judge determines that the case can move on to a trial. So Sheriff Stines had pled not guilty, or I guess former Sheriff Stines pleads not guilty, and they have their preliminary hearing. Now, the lead case agent, I found this to be interesting. So before some of the more recent information came out, and everybody was kind of wondering what was going on, so people thought that a lot of things would come out at the preliminary hearing, which oftentimes you do find out a lot more about a case. And so the lead case agent testified in the preliminary hearing, and he was you could just tell that he wasn't trying to, it almost felt like he didn't want to say anything bad about the judge. And I thought that was interesting. He was being questioned about some of the material on the cell phone to see if text messages of the sheriff's phone or on the sheriff's phone or the judge's phone would give them any kind of information about, yes, my son is being obnoxious. anyway, if the case agent who was testifying, they were asking him questions, and he kept, like, anytime he'd get asked a question, he kept saying, well, I wasn't in charge of this, but I assigned another officer to do that, in the case. And it was very strange. And I kind of was like, it just kept making me think that there was something going on with the judge that he didn't want to bring up. And I know, people don't like to talk badly about deceased people, and I get that, but at the end of the day, like, he needs to testify to whatever the truth is. So one thing that comes out is that Sheriff Stines had made a phone call to his daughter when he made that phone call in the chambers prior to the shooting. His daughter's 15 years old, so she's a minor, and the information that came out was that the daughter answered the phone, did not answer the phone when her dad, the sheriff, called her. So then he calls her on the judge's phone, and she does answer, apparently. So people are thinking, well, what's going on? Is there some kind of relationship between the minor daughter and the judge? So initially it was reported that the sheriff's daughter's number was programmed as a contact in the judge's phone. Well, evidently that's not true. That was a false rumor, but everything else was true about her answering the phone for the judge for the judge's phone and not the sheriff's phone, which seems to be that was the catalyst that kind of pushed him over the edge to commit the shooting. Now, it's hard to say exactly, because it hasn't come out yet what's going on there, but so come to find out about this whole having surveillance cameras in the judge's chambers. Now, the reason that came about, because I think that's going to end up being very pertinent to this case. So in 2022, there was a deputy, his name is Ben Fields, and Deputy Fields was arrested and served 6 months in jail because he's a deputy in the Letcher County Sheriff's Office, which is the county that we're talking about here, that this shooting happened in. And this deputy was arrested because, this deputy is in charge of the ankle monitoring program for the county. And evidently this ankle monitoring program was done through a private company that he was, like, in charge of. And it wasn't like he was employed through the county with this position with the ankle monitors. It was like its own company, like it was a private company that he worked for, so it was like a second job essentially. And so I think that's pertinent because the county might not have, I think the county contracts the company, so they might not have intimate knowledge of, like, the inner workings of that company. So what this deputy was doing is, a lot of people that are inmates that end up having ankle monitors are a lot of times drug offenders who they are going to let, instead of being in jail, they can have some kind of home confinement, and they obviously monitor their whereabouts by an ankle monitor. So so obviously people with addictions are vulnerable to begin with. And so this deputy was finding females that he was attracted to or wanted to sleep with, and basically, so these ankle monitors had to be paid for by the offender, and they were expensive. I didn't know if they're $250 a month or $250 a week, but it's one of the two. Obviously, $250 a week is outrageous for anybody. And you think about it, if you've been in jail for a period of time, or you've been arrested, and especially if you have felony charges like A lot of times they may have just lost their job. They may not have adequate housing. Like, they're in this really bad position. And so this guy was basically taking advantage of that. And he was making it known that you do sexual favors for him, that he would, I'm not sure if he was paying for the ankle monitor like himself, or if he was somehow making it so that the charges were waived, but he was using his power as the supervisor of the ankle monitoring program in order to exchange, his waiving the cost of the ankle monitoring device for these sexual favors. And a lot of these sexual favors were taking place in Judge Mullins' chambers. So, and it was like after hours a lot of the time. So I guess initially this girl, or this young lady who was, who filed the civil suit, I know her first name was Sabrina, she decided to turn him in after, she said, it was never consensual, that he basically forced himself on her, this Deputy Fields. But once she no longer was willing to do those type of favors for him, he basically turned her in because he was manipulating some of the records so it would it would show that they were at home when they weren't at home. And then once she was no longer willing to do these sexual favors for him, he was manipulating the records to show that she wasn't complying with where she was supposed to be. And so as a result of that, she ended up getting arrested. And then once she got arrested, she had no reason to not turn this sheriff or deputy in, other than maybe fear. I think maybe this Deputy Fields banked on, I don't know if he threatened her or he just kind of banked on the fact that she would be afraid to turn him in, because he's probably been doing this and has never had anyone turn him in before. So he ended up, she turned him in, and he actually pled guilty because he had been texting her. So she had all kinds of proof of what was going on. So the case got really quiet for a period of time, and a couple of days ago, a producer who works for News Nation, I believe, did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, and she got some audio interviews from when this Deputy Fields had been arrested, and they interviewed this Sabrina person who was the person who filed that civil lawsuit against the sheriff's department for her pain and suffering related to this extortion case. And in this audio interview, she's being interviewed, I'm sure, by just like another, I don't know if I'm sure it's not Letcher County. Maybe they had state police or something take over the case. I'm not sure, but she's being interviewed and they're asking her about, what was going on in the judge's chambers. And she said, well, I think, she was referencing some videos she had seen, I'm assuming from Deputy Fields. I'm not 100% sure about that, but because it doesn't really say, but she said she saw video of other, she called them higher ups from the courthouse having sex with other, I don't know if you call them inmates or offenders. I don't want to call them inmates because I don't think they were all inmates, but they were offenders, drug offenders trying to stay out of jail, essentially. And the interview asks her, well, like, who specifically? Not, higher ups doesn't really tell you much other than they were high up like had a higher position within the courthouse. And she says, well, I saw a judge. And he's like, okay, do you know which judge it was? And she seemed very reluctant. It seemed really genuine to me. And then she finally does say that it was Judge Mullins who she had seen in the video with the drug offender and, involved in some kind of sex act. So that is obviously a big deal, and it shows a level of corruption that goes even beyond just, one single deputy engaging in corruption. So that was kind of the big bombshell that came out of that FOIA request and those documents that she ended up getting. Now, I found one, so this is back in 2022. So one question I had is, even if, obviously you can't just fire a judge based on accusations. My assumption would be that these videos may not even exist any longer, or they had been deleted or something. But I find it odd that the judge wasn't not even suspended, but they could have just put him on a leave, but with pay while they were investigating what was going on, and maybe, not release that information to the public for his, for the sake of his reputation. But it doesn't sound like anything like that ever happened. Now, obviously, if they don't have definitive proof that the judge was engaging in this behavior, then I guess there might not be much they can do about it, but that's why the cameras were placed in the judge's chambers, was because of all this, the known abuse happening with the deputy, and then the alleged abuse happening with the judge. But it just seems to me like you've got this small town corruption that's going throughout the entire, the gamut of the higher ups and the, the lower level workers within the courthouse and the sheriff's department. So now, of course, this is all alleged. I don't want to say with any type of certainty that the judge was or wasn't engaged in this behavior. But the thing is the lawsuit is naming Sheriff Stines as, the main person that they are going after, because they're saying he did not adequately train or respond to some of these accusations. And just for argument's sake, let's say that Sheriff Stines was not involved in the improper behavior. Let's say he had nothing to... And I don't think there are accusations that Sheriff Stines was involved. But, I don't know. I could see why that would be upsetting if he really didn't know, because it's not like you can know what your deputies are doing at all times. And I get it, he's responsible for their training and whatnot, but I think deputies know that you can't extort inmates or offenders in order to have them perform sexual favors. I think that's common knowledge. I don't know that any special training would have made a difference there, but that's how it always goes, I think, with civil lawsuits. Is even if you look at the Karen Reed case, there's a civil lawsuit from the O'Keefe family where they're suing, some of the bars for over serving Karen, even though multiple people testified that she wasn't visibly intoxicated. I suppose they could look at the number of drinks that they charged her for, but, anyway, that's kind of par for the course. So The only other thing that's really come out at this point, besides that, which is obviously a big deal, is apparently Sheriff Stines was separated from his wife, and he had been kicked out of like the family home. And so I don't know. And I had also heard that Judge Mullins was possibly helping his wife and daughter. I don't know if that's true though. So this whole thing is, honestly, it's something that you would see in some kind of a movie. It's very crazy. I'm not saying like vigilante justice is okay. Obviously, you can't just go shoot somebody, but if in fact it comes out that there was something going on with the judge abusing the sheriff's daughter, I could understand him having some kind of like extreme reaction based on something that he found out or something. But if it's just based on the fact that his daughter answered the phone for the judge and not for him, that, I don't know, I guess that doesn't really cut it for me in terms of an excusable crime. I did find it strange that they were, not necessarily strange, but a little bit, I wasn't expecting it to be a first-degree charge, but a first-degree M-word charge, but it is. I thought the crime itself more aligned with a second-degree charge. However, sometimes they'll do like a lesser included so that the jury at the trial would have the option of like either second-degree or manslaughter. So we'll see what happens. This is definitely a case I'm going to keep following, and I will provide updates on. I think that's about it when it comes to this case that I can think of. So yeah, let me know if you have any answers to those questions about whether it's customary for there to be cameras in the judge's chambers. And yeah, that was my main question. So if there's anything else you want me to cover, let me know. I did do a podcast about Delphi. I have a lot of thoughts about Delphi. My opinion's probably going to be on the unpopular side. So because I think Richard Allen is the correct person, and I can definitely get into why. I know a lot of people think otherwise, but I think there's been a ton of misinformation in that case. So even though I did a podcast episode, I'm thinking I might get on YouTube and do something with the Delphi case. I want to talk about Karen Reed. There's a couple other ones too. So if you have anything a little more obscure that you want me to look into, I'm happy to do that. So yeah, let me know what you're thinking, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.